Continuing our discussion of fuzzing, let's look at this vulnerable server that we've downloaded. So change to whatever directory you put it in, and let's go ahead and run it. You should get a message kind of like this, and it says, I see that you're running this vulnerable server. Do not connect this to the internet or anything silly like that because it's vulnerable and it's waiting for connections. Now we can go back to our Linux host machine and have a look at what happens when we start to connect to the server. One thing we should note, it's possible that we don't know the address for this particular server. If we don't know what it is, we can look it up. So if we pull up a second command prompt and we type ipconfig, we should get information on the two network interfaces that we set up, the NAT interface and the host-only interface. Now here, notice we have the host-only interface information. Normally, by default, VirtualBox will use a 192.168.56. whatever network, and the first virtual machine to load is normally given the address 101, but you want to check that. Also, the Linux host machine should have an address of .1. So if I go back to my Linux machine and I go to a prompt, I should be able to connect to that machine. Now, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about a product called ZZUV. Now, ZZUV is a nice fuzzing tool. So if you have a Debian or Ubuntu-based Linux system, you can install it pretty easily. It should be in the repositories. So for example, on my system, I can verify that by doing an apt cache search on ZZUV. And sure enough, it says, yes, that's me, and I'm the transparent application fuzzer. If I want to install it, simply type sudo apt get install ZZUV. It will prompt you for your password. And in my case, it says, oh, Phil, you already installed that, by the way. Otherwise, it would give you a message and say, did you want to install that or not? Sometimes it doesn't give you a message. Sometimes it just installs. That's ZZUV, and we'll get to that a little bit later. For now, we want to find out, how can I connect to the remote server? Now, I want to use a product called Netcat. It's a very standard tool, probably came with your Linux system by default. If it didn't, you can easily install it. And Netcat, or NC, works like this. I give it an address. We said that our machine was at 192.168.56.101, and it's at port 9999. When I enter that, sure enough, it says, welcome to the vulnerable server. Enter help for help. So the first thing I want to see is this case sensitive? So I will type help, and sure enough, it says, I don't know what that is. So apparently, this is a case sensitive structure. So if I type help in uppercase, I see that there are several commands that this vulnerable server supports. One of them is help, and there's some other commands, and there's an exit command. Now, notice that help and exit have no parameters. However, everything else seems to take a parameter. Let's see what happens if I type help and then, just a string. And it reports a message to me, and it says that command-specific help hasn't been implemented. What if I give it a really long string, type help, and I'm going to give it just a whole bunch of A's? Will this cause it to crash? It doesn't work, at least not with that many A's. This is one way to use Netcat, but we would probably prefer to run this in some sort of script rather than just sitting here and blindly entering stuff ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and exit, and I'm back to my command prompt. Now, is there a way I could send a help command to my vulnerable server and then come back? And the answer is yes. So here's what you can do. If I want to send a string to some sort of process across the network, I'm going to echo the help command, echo help. So I'm going to pipe that to Netcat, and my same address, 192, 168, 56, 101, port 9999. So now what happens? When I type this and I hit enter, it has run my help command and returned the results, and I'm back at my command prompt. So if I'm putting this inside of a script, the script can try something else until it gets this thing to fail. So I could add some things to my script, a parameter, and I get the same result. At this point, we're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss some semi-automated ways of entering really long strings into your network server.